I wasn't looking for trouble that night at the Harbor Terrace Glass Pavilion in Seattle. Honestly, I was just there to support Avery. She'd been talking about this corporate partnership launch for weeks. Late nights rehearsing slides, tense calls with the board, obsessing over every pixel of the branding deck. It was her moment, and I wanted to see her own it. The place was a monument to polish. The pavilion's glass walls overlooked Elliott Bay, where the last streaks of sunset smeared the water in gold and orange. Inside, the lighting was carefully dimmed to make every champagne flute gleam. Waiters in black vests moved with choreographed precision, offering hors d'oeuvres so small they looked like they belonged in a dollhouse. The air buzzed with polite laughter, practiced pitches, and the low hum of people angling for advantage. I drifted along the edges, keeping out of her way. Avery thrived in these rooms. Her smile could cut through the noise. Her voice had that perfect blend of warmth and authority that made even the most self-important VP lean in. She was in her element. I was content to be a quiet plus one. Until I wasn't. I'd stepped away from the main floor to escape a cluster of overly talkative consultants, moving toward a quieter corridor where the glass met steel in a clean seam. That's when I saw Cole, Avery's boss, emerge from a narrow service stairwell. His movements were casual, almost slow, like he was trying not to seem rushed. He adjusted his tie, glanced once over his shoulder, and then strode toward the event floor without looking back. Not even 5 seconds later, Avery appeared from the same stairwell. She didn't see me at first. Her hand went to smooth the front of her dress, an automatic, almost subconscious motion, and then to tug her presentation mic back into place. The way she brushed her hair over one shoulder looked like muscle memory, the kind you use when putting yourself back together. That's when my eyes caught it. A faint streak of foundation smeared along Cole's dark suit lapel, just a shade different from his skin tone, but identical to the makeup I'd watched Avery apply in the hotel room mirror earlier that evening. It wasn't glaringly obvious, not the kind of thing most people would notice in the dim light, but it might as well have been under a spotlight for me. At her feet, near the wall where the stairwell met the corridor, lay a cream envelope. Heavy cardstock, no logo, just her name written in bold black ink. The top was unsealed, and the corner of a hotel keycard was visible inside. I stepped toward her, the sound of my shoes soft against the carpet. She noticed me then, but her face didn't flicker with surprise or guilt. Instead, she tilted her head slightly, smiled in that calm, professional way she used for media crews, and launched straight into an explanation that sounded like it had been waiting on her tongue. Something about urgent business matters and technical sound issues with the mic that she'd just been troubleshooting. There was no pause for me to respond, no gap where I could ask the obvious question, why she'd been in a service stairwell seconds after her boss, or why there was an envelope on the ground with a key card and her name on it. She didn't give me room to breathe, much less confront her. Back on the main floor, she intercepted a couple of executives in mid-conversation and slid into the circle with that same poised energy. When she introduced me, it wasn't my husband, or even my partner. It was, "This is Ethan. We know each other from way back." Her hand brushed my arm briefly, then she turned away before I could read her expression. For the rest of the night, she treated me like background furniture. I was there, technically, but I might as well have been invisible. She flitted between conversations, laughing at Cole's remarks a beat too long, leaning in just enough for anyone watching to feel like they were intruding. Every time I caught her eye from across the room, she was already looking somewhere else. I played along, smiled when expected, clinked glasses when prompted, murmured polite acknowledgments to strangers I'd never see again. But while the spotlight was fixed on the stage, I slipped into the shadows. Near the back of the pavilion, in a semi-hidden alcove behind the AV booth, one of the presentation laptops sat unattended. Its desktop was open to a folder labeled with Avery's project title. A complete set of files, slides, financial models, technical documents, neatly organized. I glanced over my shoulder, my pulse quick but steady, and slid my flash drive into the USB port. The copy progress bar felt like it moved through molasses. In those slow seconds, I could hear the muffled sound of applause from the main floor as someone announced the official start of the program. No one came near me. When the files finished transferring, I ejected the drive, tucked it into my inside pocket, and walked back toward the crowd. Avery was at the front, her smile trained on a group of investors, her hand resting lightly on Cole's arm as he leaned in to speak. I didn't wait for the speeches to end. While everyone's eyes were on the stage, I made my way to the coat check, retrieved my jacket, and slipped out into the cool Seattle night. The glass pavilion behind me gleamed like a jewel box, full of people who thought they knew exactly what was happening inside. But I knew better. Her deliberate indifference that night wasn't just an insult. It was a signal, a warning, and, whether she realized it or not, an opening. On the drive home from the pavilion, the city lights flashing past the windshield, I couldn't stop replaying the moment in the stairwell. It was burned into my mind, the order they'd emerged, the faint smear of makeup on his lapel, the envelope on the floor like some misplaced clue. I didn't say anything. Avery rode beside me in the passenger seat, scrolling her phone with that practiced half-smile she wore when pretending to be busy. The silence between us wasn't new, but it felt heavier now, like it had substance. I could almost hear it breathing. Somewhere between downtown and the freeway, the mental reel shifted. The stairwell scene wasn't isolated. It wasn't even surprising, not really. I started stacking it next to other moments from the past few months, like laying out cards from a deck I didn't want to admit I'd been carrying. There was the perfume, not her usual scent. Something sharper, more expensive, the kind you notice when it lingers in a room after someone's gone. I first caught it in early spring, faint traces on her scarf, then later on the passenger seat of her car. When I asked about it, she'd laughed and said one of her colleagues must have spilled some in the office. Then came the disabled location sharing. We'd always kept ours on, mostly for convenience, like when one of us needed to know if the other was near the store or stuck in traffic. One day hers just stopped. A glitch, she said, swiping at her screen as though it was all too technical to explain. It never came back. The investor meetings were next. Usually late afternoons or early evenings, always running long, often ending with her texting that she'd grab something to eat downtown, so I shouldn't wait up. She'd arrive home looking polished but tired, carrying that faint edge of satisfaction people get when they've been somewhere they wanted to be more than anywhere else. I remembered the time I'd found a suitcase neatly packed in the trunk of her car. Not in the way you toss a gym bag back there. This was folded, zipped, and ready for a flight or an overnight stay. When I asked, she said she was taking some marketing samples to a client across the state. Yet no receipts, no mileage logs, no follow-up calls ever came of it. Then there were the hotel charges. Always the same one. A waterfront place with a cocktail lounge that doubled as a tourist trap and a quiet corner for business deals. The charges were never for a room, just the bar. Still, they stacked up month after month like a breadcrumb trail no one else was following. Even our home had been changing subtly at first. Our photographs, the framed ones from vacations, weddings, even silly selfies, were vanishing from the walls and shelves. In their place, vague, minimalist prints and a desk calendar filled with cryptic entries. No descriptions, just block-out dates and vague labels like out or off-site. One night, a week before the pavilion event, she'd abruptly canceled our planned trip to visit my parents. She claimed an urgent project deadline, made a show of regret, and promised we'd reschedule. Later, I checked the sync from her fitness tracker, something she'd set up long ago so we could compare workouts. That day, her steps had clustered in a 2-mile radius around that same waterfront hotel. The fragments weren't random anymore. They aligned into a pattern I'd seen before. Not in my own life, but in the wreckage of friends' relationships, in late-night confessions over drinks. Small shifts in habits. Excuses that had just enough truth to survive casual questions. An invisible current pulling her away from me while she smiled over her shoulder as if nothing had changed. I kept driving, letting her hum softly under her breath as she tapped out another message. The freeway stretched ahead in long ribbons of white and red lights. She didn't notice I was barely glancing at the road, my mind locked on a different map entirely. The one that connected all these small betrayals into a route she'd been taking without me for months. At home, she headed upstairs without a word, muttering something about an early call in the morning. I stayed in the kitchen, leaning against the counter, listening to her footsteps fade. There's a point where suspicion stops feeling like paranoia and starts to feel like recognition, and I'd crossed it somewhere between the parking garage and our driveway. I opened my laptop, pulled up my email, and searched through months of her work newsletters and corporate updates, the kind she sometimes forwarded me without context. I wasn't looking for smoking G***s, just the rhythm of her schedule, the gaps where something else could fit. And there they were, repeating cycles of off-site days and client dinners that never made it to her official reports. It was methodical, almost elegant in its predictability. But that kind of predictability is a weakness if someone's paying attention. And now I closed the laptop and let the room go dark. Upstairs, the faint sound of the shower started, water hitting tile. The smell of that new perfume drifted faintly down the stairs, sharper now, as if it had been reapplied. I wondered if she thought I didn't notice, or worse, if she knew I did and it didn't matter. The Harbor Terrace stairwell hadn't been the start. It was just the moment I stopped pretending I didn't already know where this was heading. The next morning, my phone buzzed before I'd even finished my first cup of coffee. The sender was the event technician from the Harbor Terrace launch, someone I chatted with briefly while wandering the AV area the night before. He'd promised to send me some high-res images from the event for my personal album. Instead of photos, the link in his message led to a compressed archive. The label read, Harbor Terrace _backstage_come-backup. I clicked before I could second-guess myself. The files were arranged in neat little clips, each from a different corner of the pavilion. The first few were ordinary, caterers setting up trays, marketing assistants adjusting banners, a lighting tech on a ladder. Then I found the ones from the service corridor. In one, Cole brushed past a sound technician, his hand reaching out almost absently to run along someone's back just out of frame. A second later, Avery appeared, leaning slightly toward him as they spoke in low tones. The camera's microphone didn't catch their words, but the way her lips curved upward felt private in a way no urgent business matter ever could. Another clip, from a different angle, showed them entering the elevator that led to the suite levels above the event space. Cole stepped in first, turning just enough to keep the door from closing until Avery joined him. The doors slid shut and they were gone. No one else was in view. I sat back in my chair, the bitter aftertaste of coffee coating my tongue. I replayed the clips, looking for any ambiguity that could give her the benefit of the doubt. There wasn't any. Still, I needed more than video shadows and body language. I'd already seen enough to satisfy my own instincts, but I wanted something that could survive her inevitable spin. That meant going to a place I told myself I wouldn't, her laptop. She was in the shower when I made my move, steam curling out from under the bathroom door. Her laptop sat open on the dining table, still logged in from whatever she'd been working on last night. I slid into the chair and opened her documents. It didn't take long. Buried inside a folder labeled innocuously as Q4 Projections was a subfolder named Personal. Inside, PDFs, lease agreements, and scanned forms. One file stopped me cold, LakePoint_app lease. PDF. I clicked it open. The pages confirmed what the file name promised. A signed lease for a 2-bedroom apartment in an upscale complex by the lake, the kind with private docks and a concierge service. Avery's signature was on the tenant line. Cole's name appeared twice, once as the primary contact, once as the guarantor. My pulse steadied instead of spiking. This wasn't a fling. This was logistics. Planning. I scrolled to the start date, less than 3 weeks away. In black and white, it was all laid out. Her intent to move out, his commitment to making it financially seamless, their future mapped in legal terms. The bathroom door upstairs clicked shut, followed by the faint hum of her hairdryer. I copied the entire personal folder to my drive, closed the laptop, and returned it to its exact position. When she came downstairs, she was dressed in her work jacket, phone in hand, eyes skimming some email. "I'll be late tonight," she said casually, not looking at me. "Investor dinner." I nodded, careful to keep my face neutral. "Of course." She kissed my cheek like a habit, the kind you do without thinking, then headed for the door. Her perfume lingered long after she was gone, sharp and expensive. I sat there in the silence she left behind, my mind working through the chain of events. The clips from the technician, the lease agreement, the timeline. There was no space left for doubt. She wasn't just stepping out on me. She was stepping into something else entirely, and she'd already built the landing pad. It was strange, almost disorienting, how calm I felt. Suspicion is exhausting. Certainty is clarifying. The mental noise that had been chewing at me for weeks suddenly went quiet, replaced by a cold, focused clarity. That clarity told me something else, too. She was planning to leave on her terms, with everything arranged so I'd have no leverage when she did. But her terms were about to change. I spent the afternoon combing through the files I'd pulled from the presentation laptop, not looking for gossip but for structure, version histories, naming patterns, fingerprints. The folder tree was orderly in the way only a public launch forces: pitch decks, partner one-pagers, demo builds, financial models, risk memos, and a fat directory named /tech with subfolders I could have labeled blindfolded. I knew that architecture because years ago, in a different life, I'd designed it for myself. Inside /text/module_stream, I opened a Python file named stream_reduce_v12, py, and felt my stomach cool. The comments were rewritten, the function names cleaned up, but the skeleton was mine. The core reducer still carried the same three-stage pass I'd hacked together at 2 a.m. in our old apartment: pre-bucket, weighted prune, adaptive gap fill. Even the odd little guard I used against NaN cascades, an ugly one-liner with a double or I always meant to fix, was still there, hiding under a fresh coat of style. Once upon a time, I'd left that algorithm in a shared repo so Avery could run experiments on her product ideas. We were married, we didn't draw hard lines. I never imagined I'd see its bones marching on stage under someone else's banner. I kept digging. In /legal, a redlined IP review, external partner, referenced legacy code integrated by Avery S. The note read, source elements believed to originate from spouse's research. Internal risk contingent on personal status stabilization. The phrase showed up again in HR correspondence. An email with the subject retention package, offering a bonus tranche, cliffed equity, and a bump after stabilization of personal status and partner optics. Someone had written Q3 target in the margin. A spreadsheet named incentive model. XLSX broke it down in currency instead of euphemism. If the launch hit its milestones, Avery's award would vest early. There was a line item called Keyman Exposure Cole, and another called IP Risk Ethan. Next to my name, the cell read, eliminated. Not mitigated. Not addressed. Eliminated. In /ops/logs, I found location exports from a team calendar plugin. GPS crumbs no one expects a non-admin to notice. The pattern was relentless. Repeated pings at the luxury waterfront hotel I already knew too well, and clusters of off-site blocks that overlapped with Cole's calendar. Some were coded mentor sync. Others had no label at all. There was more, of course. A polished investor brief titled Seamless Signal, monetizing live data at the edge, devoted a slide to origin risk, describing a former collaborator, me, as non-participating and non-essential to current roadmap. The appendix declared the code base clean, with a footnote, legacy prototype superseded, chain of authorship constrained to current team. It read like someone trying to talk themselves into believing the ink on their hands would wash off. I leaned back and let the chair roll until it bumped the wall. I wasn't angry in the loud way anger looks in movies. It was the colder kind that organizes drawers. The plan was obvious. Romance as glue, promotion as reward, my work as fuel, and a path where I disappeared exactly on schedule. The envelope with her name on it wasn't carelessness. It was confidence. I copied everything twice and stashed OneDrive offsite. Then I opened my old notes. If they wanted to claim the house I built, I would redraw the blueprints room by room and put my name on the deed properly this time. That night, Avery floated a conversation over dinner, casual as steam from a bowl. She mentioned valuation, hinted that her visibility would increase materially, after the partnership went live, and slid a verbal NDA across the table wrapped in a smile. She didn't ask what I'd been doing that day. She didn't notice that I didn't ask about hers. When she stepped outside to take a call, I returned to the /tech directory. A commit log exposed by a forgotten Git folder showed a burst of activity 2 months ago, at exactly the time our shared photos began disappearing from the shelves. The commits were authored from her corporate email, but the messages had Cole's brevity: merge, cleanup, remove legacy hooks. One message said, finalize reducer for demo. The hash corresponded to the file with my 3-stage pass. They hadn't just borrowed an idea, they had trimmed it to fit their slide timing. I pulled up my own archived repo, the private one, the one no employer ever touched, and ran a diff in my head. The parts that mattered were still mine, and the parts they'd grafted on were brittle. If I wanted to, I could write a cleaner, faster reducer that avoided every contested edge. I could version history their claim into a corner and leave them arguing over a silhouette. I closed the lid and stared at the dark screen, watching my reflection resolve against the kitchen lights. The decision formed with the same calm that had carried me out of the pavilion. I wouldn't confront her. Not yet. I would step sideways into the space she'd cleared by pretending I was invisible, and I would become inconvenient in all the places they assumed I was already gone. In the morning, I called an attorney I trusted and laid out the facts without poetry. We filed for divorce. We recorded authorship, dates, and provenance of the algorithm. We drafted a letter to their board requesting preservation of evidence and imposing a temporary restriction on commercial use of any materials derived from my code pending review. By lunch, the letters were sent. By late afternoon, I had a response from counsel acknowledging receipt and promising an internal assessment. The phrase, "we take these matters seriously," appeared 3 times. I took a walk to clear my head and realized I wasn't rehearsing a speech for Avery. I was inventorying next steps. Secure backups, rebuild disputed modules from scratch, cut fresh patents from clean wood, and make sure the trail from idea to implementation fit in the palm of a judge's hand. When I came back, Avery asked what I wanted to do that weekend. She suggested the lake. I said I was thinking of traveling. Neither of us asked where the other was going. The distance between us wasn't measured in miles anymore. It was measured in commits, signatures, and the number of times she had practiced ignoring me until she forgot I could still see. 2 days after my attorney's letters went out, Avery suggested we go somewhere neutral for dinner. Her word, not mine. She picked an int * mate fusion place we'd visited once before for an anniversary, the kind of place where each plate looked like it had been assembled with tweezers. She arrived in a cream blouse and a blazer that probably cost more than my first car. Cole's name never came up directly, but it was floating between us like steam over the table. She opened with the kind of preamble I'd heard from founders before they pivot. Things are moving fast. I want you to understand, this is about my future. She spoke as if my only role in this conversation was to nod at the right beats. Her voice carried that blend of confidence and sympathy reserved for dismissals, like she was letting me down easy while she traded up. Between courses, she started sketching an outline for the next few months. Accelerated transition into a new role, public-facing media spots, travel. The pronouns were all singular: I, my, me. The version of the future that included us together had already been archived, if it had ever existed in her mind. I didn't interrupt. I let her talk, occasionally tilting my glass to my lips so I could mask my expression in the shadow of the rim. She didn't notice that my phone, set face down beside the water glass, had already confirmed delivery of the filings to the county clerk earlier that morning. I'd spent the past 48 hours with my lawyer and a tech specialist paralegal. The chain of authorship for my original streaming algorithm was documented to the hour, supported by commit histories, timestamp prototypes, and witness statements from 2 former colleagues who'd helped test it years ago. We had filed for an injunction preventing commercial deployment of any derivative works until authorship and licensing were resolved. Her partnership would be frozen before it reached the runway. And it wouldn't be my name on the freeze order, it would be the board's after they read the packet of evidence I'd sent that morning through counsel. The video clips, the lease, the HR retention notes, and the equity schedule that tied her promotion to my removal. Cole's name appeared often enough to make recusal from any internal review the only sane choice for them. By the time the trace arrived, I knew the board's general counsel had opened the email. By dessert, 2 red receipts confirmed that both the audit chair and the CEO had forwarded the packet to outside investigators. Avery still didn't suspect. She was too busy painting a picture of the new chapter in her career, complete with a knowing half-smile when she mentioned the right people backing her. I didn't ask who. I already knew. When the check came, she slid her card across the table before I could reach for mine. A gesture meant to show she could handle herself, that she was already independent. I let her have it. That night, back at the house, she disappeared into the upstairs office, murmuring into her headset. I stayed in the kitchen, making tea, and watched the email notifications roll in on my laptop. The investigation was formally opened. Her project's launch date was under internal review. Access restrictions on certain repositories had been applied, pending clarification of rights. The next morning, she was quiet over coffee, scrolling her phone with an expression that tightened slightly each time she refreshed. By the time she left for work, I'd received confirmation from my lawyer. The injunction notice had been served. She would see it before lunch.